everybody. Welcome to the Through the Veil podcast with Elle and Camille. I'm Elle,
Hi, I'm Camille.
and this is the podcast where we seek to demystify, develop, and celebrate our spiritual gifts all through a faith-based lens. Today we have with us Mick. Hi, Mick.
Hi, hi. Nice to see you both.
Thanks for being here. Mick, we met through a Facebook group that we're both in. He is a personal coach that helps people continue their relationship with loved ones who've passed away, help them find their peace and purpose and joy. He also has a podcast called The Spiritual Scientist. So that's a little bit of background on Mick. But I wanted to ask you, as we get started, how did you even get into this line of work? What led to this? I mean, Elle and I have our own stories, and we've done episodes on this podcast, kind of breaking that down, how we got here. How did you get here?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's always a bit hard to know where to start when somebody asks me that, but
Broad
looking
question.
looking back, yeah, I think in hindsight, looking back, when I was around about 13, and a great aunt of mine passed away. We were quite close. We had a lot in common to do with music. I played the piano and she played the piano. And just after she passed away, I had an experience of her, which I think, whenever you try and describe spiritual experiences, I always find that they never quite, you can't really do it. You know what I mean? So I always tell people it was a little bit like a cross between seeing, feeling, hearing, touching, sensing, but also none of those, you know? So anyway, I had an experience of her being close to me at that age. And then I think I kind of put all that stuff away for a while. It just went into my subconscious or something. Then sort of I got to, like, I guess 18, 19, and woke up spiritually again in a way. And started reading everything I could get my hands on about spirituality in general, about life after death and near-death experience and all those kind of things. And then, I was a musician at the time, a touring artist and recording artist and all that sort of stuff. So, but my spirituality was just growing and growing and growing. And I guess I spent sort of 25 years studying it really in depth and having my own meditation practice and all those kinds of things. And then later on, I started doing coaching and counseling with couples and businesses and therapists and all different kinds of things. And then just in the last 2 or 3 years, I decided, right, I'm going to, take that leap and bring my spirituality and the spiritual work that I've been doing with myself in a way into my work. And that's when the way I've always felt closest to the spiritual world, or closest to God, or whatever words people like to use, is through loved ones that have passed away. And so over the years, various relatives passed away, and my grandmother and grandfather, who I was really, really close to, passed away a couple of years ago. And I just felt like they were sort of calling on me to help me with this kind of work. So yeah,
That seems like
that's how I got here.
scary transition. Did you, I don't know, how was that a big leap for you to blend these two things? Did you feel like that was going to be well received, or was it a little intimidating to jump off that,
Yeah, yeah, it
combine
was.
these two
Yeah,
worlds?
yeah, it was a little bit scary, but I think it's been such a part of my life for so long. It was quite natural as well. But yeah, a little bit scary in terms of putting yourself out there, saying this is
Right.
what I do now, and going online and doing live videos and things like that. Yeah, yeah. I still haven't really, I still don't do much on my personal pages and say, hey, this is what I do now. But yeah, a bit scary.
Yeah, I feel like our viewers and listeners are going to wonder. So I'm going to ask, what kind of music were you recording and touring with? Like, what was your music? Can you give us a little snippet about
Were you
that?
a rock star? We need to
Ah,
Yeah,
know.
sure. Yeah,
Rock
yeah, I
star.
was pretty much a rock star. um, yeah, a failed rock star. But no, how would I describe it? I think we called ourselves folk rock. I had a band called The
Ah,
Restless for 7 years, and we had a bit of success in Australia with touring and radio play and that kind of thing. And then I went solo. I was called Young Werther was the name I used, and yeah, I would always sort of say folk rock, but sometimes we were quite rocky, and other times we were more folky.
when we spoke earlier, you talked about some training that you received when you lived in Germany. Can you tell us about how you kind of prepared to be doing what you're doing now? What was that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I didn't mention that, did I? I came across the work, you kind of read widely, and I was kind of into Buddhist stuff, and then it was, various kinds of things. And then for a while, actually, I was right into Judaism because I worked in this big kosher hotel, and I thought, well, they really know how to look after each other, that kind of thing. But anyway, I came across the work of the Austrian spiritual researcher, or whatever you want to call him, Rudolf Steiner.
Hmm.
And that was actually what, in a way, brought me back to Christianity, because he had this series of lectures called From Jesus to Christ. And it just gave me, it kind of blew my mind. And I'd sort of rejected Christianity in my, I guess, late teens, and thought, it's just this big control system, like I guess the churchianity, I started to call it, um, as opposed to Christianity. But not that you can't have both together now, as I've got older and more open. But yes, so that grew in me very strongly. And then the opportunity came to move to Germany to actually study at a seminary, to
Wow.
become a priest of the Christian community, which is this movement that came out of Rudolf Steiner's work, or that he helped to found. And it was really, like you might say, a kind of a non-dogmatic Christianity, where you were really free to believe whatever you want to believe, in a sense. So there was no dogma, um, but they still had the ritual. So you still have a communion service, you still have the baptism, you still have marriage, you still have, the last rites when somebody's dying. All of those things are still there. So it's almost like those traditional core rituals are still there, but you also had this freedom of belief. And that was just very appealing to me. And I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do, move my family to Germany to study that. And I did a few years, but I didn't finish, like, the actual to become ordained part. We had a few, I guess, family difficulties and things like that, which stopped me going further. But it's still a possibility. But anyway, I bring all that into my work now anyway. So yeah, that's
It's
kind of a
amazing.
long story
How
short.
can I ask how, because this is a thing that I feel like a lot of people struggle with today, blending this spirituality with religion, because sometimes they seem like two very different things, two very different aspects.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, it seems like the hierarchical structure of some faiths, some particular denominations in Christianity can get very dogmatic, can get very controlling. How did you find the bridge to blend your spirituality with your budding faith?
Through Rudolf Steiner's work, really, because it's it's deeply spiritual in that the sense that you mean the word. He talks about angels, that some people see them, some people actually behold them, experience them strongly,
Mhm.
um, but not just in a sort of a vague way. He talked about it in a really concrete way. Like, actually, some people can perceive the angels, some people can even perceive the next level of hierarchy in the spiritual world, the archangels. Some people can perceive even higher than that, the archai, or the time spirits. Some people can perceive higher than that, all the way to the seraphim and cherubim. So it's like he made it, he sort of made it logical, but also made it concrete. So it's not just this vague spirituality, it's more concrete than that. And then he had, if the way he described the Christ being, and this being that, I don't know how far to go with this kind of stuff, depending on your listeners, but he talks about the ancient sun god that was worshipped in all different cultures all over the world, um, with all these prophecies about that one day this being will actually come to earth, this being will incarnate, and that actually happened in Jesus of Nazareth. And that was what actually happened in from this esoteric Christian perspective. And that just sort of brought all together all my sort of childhood Christianity stuff with my spirituality, and merged them and made it all make sense. And even, some of the, I know that some churches, like you said, can be dogmatic. And in some ways, I think that that's okay. It's just where you're at and what you need. at the time. And sometimes I think, like with the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, their dogmas are actually, I don't know, how do you put it? The dogmas are that we think dogmas bad. I tend to go dogmas bad. They say these are our dogmas and they're good. Who am I to say, your dogmas are bad? But I can't do the dogmatic thing because, as you guys both know, when you just meet a person, you're there with the person. And because I'm working with people who are grieving, there's no point me coming in and saying, oh, your belief is this and you should believe this and you
Right.
should believe
Right.
that.
Right.
You just want to be there with the person, with, hearing and feeling with them, with what they're going through, and empathizing, and, being honest with them and have them be honest with you. And you don't want to go into beliefs and things like that. So yeah, I think that's what's helped me a lot as well, is just to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No,
No, I think you
I
hit it
think you
well. Yeah.
did. I want to know now what you do with your clients. Like, how do you help them? What's your practice look like?
I have something that I call the Staying Connected program, and it starts with a conversation. So people will book a free session with me. We'll jump on a Zoom call or a telephone call, and I'll just listen and ask questions so that I can get a very deep understanding of where they are right now. Because everybody's grief is different. Everybody experiences it in their own way, and of course there are certain stages, but sometimes they come in different order, and sometimes you don't go through some of those stages. So all that kind of stuff. So I want to deeply understand where that person is right now, um, what they've been through, and where they ideally want to be. And then, if it's a good fit and if it's the right time for them, and if I feel I can help them, because sometimes I speak to someone and I don't think I can help you. So I'm just honest about that. If I say I don't think I can help, I'll pass them on to someone else. Maybe I send them your details, Camille. um, and yeah, then we have an 8-week program. So we walk through this process of actually, first of all, describing how do I feel connected with my loved one? What can I do on a daily basis, even just with a few minutes, so that I can begin to actually really feel that connection. And for some people, they do have strong experiences. Others don't. It's just that they get a very strong feeling that they're with their loved ones, and that's sort of, in some ways, I think that's safer. So I try and help people to get to that place. Then we also do, I guess, the psychological side of things as well, helping them to manage their thoughts and their feelings through, certain psychological things, but also somatic work. So, where am I experiencing the grief in my body right now? Is it deep down in my core somewhere? Is it in my heart? Where do I need to support my body? So we're looking at the body side, the soul, or the psychological side. And then we get into the spiritual part of it as well. Like, what are the stages that those that have died go through? What does the soul and the spirit go through? And how can we actually, and this is a big thing that's kind of different from a lot of people, I think, is how can we support them on their
Mm.
continued journey, which allows them to help and support us more here, because it's this relationship. uh, it's changed dramatically, but that relationship continues. And so that's been a big game changer for people as well, is if I think I can do something for them, that can really help to free people up a lot. I've found. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a little bit about what we do.
That's that's really amazing. I think a lot of times that last step gets overlooked or skipped, and we just kind of make an assumption that people in spirit don't need anything from us anymore. Like they're completely detached, they're separate, they're doing their own thing, and we're doing ours in like parallel streams, maybe going different directions. And I love that you bring that back into alignment. Like, what can we do for them as they move through, you know, their own grief process, perhaps on the other side, shifting and transitioning away from a very physical, embodied existence to something a little different, right? Different formats.
Absolutely.
So, and I also believe that it's so instructional because grief grief is probably one of the most challenging things that we can experience in a human existence. And we are physical beings that are doers. So sitting on your hands and being like, your mind will psychologically work out eventually. Like that is the least helpful thing anybody can tell you, right? You want to do something to get over it. You want to be helpful. You want to be helpful to others and yourself. And if you can feel like you are helping that loved one who has crossed through that veil into the next stage, I imagine that is tremendously beneficial to your well-being.
Yeah,
It's
because
beautiful.
grief is a lack of control. You lose control. You lose that feeling of safety or security. So if you can have control over something, right? I can't control that my loved one passed. I can't control how, whether I was there to say goodbye or not, but I can control my intention to connect with them and my intention of, how we communicate with them. And, there are things, right, that we have control over. What, from your perspective, Mick, is a way that we can help? Because I'm sure our listeners are like, well, what are we supposed to do for our loved ones on the other side? How can we be helpful? What is that? Is there something you want to share about that?
Firstly, just thinking of them, which of course, when you've lost someone very, very close and it's recent, of course you're thinking about them all the time anyway. But sometimes it happens that someone's died, and a few years later we kind of don't bring them to mind as much. So bringing them to mind, I think, is the first thing. So that's sort of the thinking, is bringing them to mind in an image form, in our mind's eye kind of thing. And then what we can do, and I sort of suggest this is just a practice for a few minutes a day. It doesn't have to be 24/7. So we're bringing them to mind, and then to conjure or focus on the feelings of gratitude that we have for them. So, that can be very difficult to do, especially in the early stages of grief, because, sometimes not, but sometimes it is, where really it's just the pain of the loss is too much. And so, I'm not saying that people have to flip over into gratitude just like that. It's not always possible. But to treat that as a spiritual practice, to each day bring them to mind, try to feel the feelings of gratitude that this person came into your life at all, that you got to experience what you got to experience with them, just the precious moments, and as you both well know, know really well. One thing grief teaches you is just how precious every single moment on earth is. It's just, when that person's not there anymore, you just get that, and you can't hide from it, how precious everything is. So just to feel the gratitude for those moments, everything that person gave you in terms of their personality, their sense of humor, all the things. So to really work at that, and again, just for a few minutes a day. And then at the same time, to turn your attention towards something spiritual, or to, in a sense, bring something spiritual to them. And that could be something from your own religious tradition. It could be a poem. It could be reading them, descriptions of life after death. It could be anything like that, because one thing I think is that we've got something unique here on earth. There's a kind of a spirituality that lives here on earth with us in the physical body, and we can share that with them. And in a sense, it's like sending them nourishment, sending them strength to go through the different stages that they need to go through where they are. So yeah, that's the sort of the basis of it that I suggest. And one thing I learned through just experience teaching this is that, and you both may have heard this kind of thing before as well, but where somebody's lost someone and they're actually walking around 24/7 talking to the person. And that's great. That's fine. I don't stop people doing that or anything, but sometimes after months or even years of doing that all day, every day, they get a little bit like, they feel like that they have to think of them 24/7. Otherwise the person's going to disappear, or they're not going to feel connected with them. And what I try to help people to understand is that if you just do that for the things I just suggested for a concentrated period, say 5-10 minutes each day, what that tends to do, and what I've seen happen with people, is it sort of frees them up for the rest of the day. It's like, oh, right, I don't have to be constantly thinking of them 24/7 or I'm going to lose them. I can do this concentrated time of really being with them consciously, with a lot of intention, with goodwill, with warmth, with my spiritual thoughts and gratitude. And then what happens, what I think happens there is they're actually giving us strength. They're sending us their spiritual strength and courage for our days, for to work through our grief or to follow our passion in life or to do the things we really need and want to do in life. They're helping us with that. And so that's what I've seen happen, yeah, with a lot of
Yeah.
people. So
I have a great example of that. I work with a lot of widows, and widowers, I guess, people who've lost spouses, which is a horrible, horrible thing to occur, right? Especially if you still have young children at home. One particular woman who has been a student of mine and I've worked with, she checks in with her husband in spirit every single day at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. And it's like she connects with him, she'll have a prayer, and it's like they sit down and make their battle plan for the day together. And then she goes through her day, and then at the end of the day, they check in together. And it's part of her daily morning routine. She feels like that is what empowers her to really move through her day and feel connected with her husband on the other side. And I think it's beautiful. And then she knows that he's with her all throughout the day, right? They're on the same page, they have the same plan. They lined up. And then she can take him with her for the rest of her day. I think it's a beautiful practice.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it, that she can take him with her the rest of the day. That's so nice. Yeah, I've had other people do that too, where it's a morning and evening. In a way, when it's a widow or someone's lost a spouse, it's a little bit just like in life, we both went to work, we both did our
Right.
thing, and then in the evenings we came back together, and in the mornings we saw each other, and it's a little bit just like that. Maybe you don't want to be in each other's pockets 24/7. I know it's fine if you want to as well. I don't ever say don't do that, but some people start to feel that they actually need to wind up
Right.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's a fine line between wanting to connect with loved ones on the other side, and it's kind of like if I don't do it, then I can't function, right? We don't want it to like stop us from functioning. So I tell people like functional living is not a betrayal, right?
Right.
That's a great way
Functional
to put
living it,
it.
but it feels like it is because you're starting to
Yeah.
forget them. And so if you want to like hold on to that pain, maybe it'll help bring their memory back stronger. They don't want us to remember them just from those painful moments, because that's not really like accurate, right? I think sometimes that's what we in our grief, we have this frenzy of like, well, whatever I need to hold on to feel them, I'll do it, even if it's to our own detriment and even to the detriment of the relationship. So just that whole like concept, like you're saying, is um, we can still have interdependence. We don't need to cling so desperately to the pain or the compulsion of that, because it could be negative. Something I wanted to ask you though is I know you emphasize connecting to loved ones in a way that is safe. Can you touch on that a little bit? The safety behind it?
Whenever we get into spirituality and take up any kind of spiritual practices, there's always a little bit of danger with it. I don't know if you've ever met anyone or had experiences yourself where uh, you've come out of yourself, or your spiritual work has kind of imbalanced you in some way. So I think what I'm getting at with the safety thing is just to be a little bit careful, because everything today seems to be in spiritual circles, open, 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 open. Yeah, open yourself. But we've got to be a little bit careful. What are we opening ourselves up to? And I don't know if it's okay to talk like this
Yeah.
here. So just
All of
edit
it.
it if you have to. But yeah, like I mean, not all spiritual entities and beings or forces have our best interests at heart.
Right.
There are, you know, demonic forces. There are evil forces or beings, we could say, that want to take us down particular paths. And that doesn't have to mean, that can sound very, very strong and sort of scary to people too.
Hmm.
But even just like, I notice if I'm with my children and they say something and I get a little bit triggered and then I get a little bit angry or whatever, you know, in a sense, that you could think of that as a kind of a being that's got hold of me in that moment. You know, I let's say I shouted and I kind of lost control of myself a little bit for a moment. That's what I'm talking about. Not talking about some weird ogre type being appearing and scaring everyone. You know what I mean? So when we go to open, I think it's also really important that we learn how to close, that
Yes.
we learn how to actually shut off what we're doing spiritually and come right back down to earth, feel our feet against, the bottom of our feet against the floor, and get back into the practical daily life that we need to do things in. If the
Yeah.
dishes need doing or the washing needs done or whatever, that we can still function.
Yeah. The
Because I think
functional living.
if I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it exactly like that, but um, because we can literally drift off into another world, and
Right.
I've seen it happen with people. It's a temptation actually, because there is a kind of a, I don't know exactly, but it's a little bit like there is a kind of a false spiritual world that exists,
Mhm.
or maybe it doesn't even exist. I don't know, but I've seen people get stuck there, and there's a temptation to go, oh, I just want to go into the land of bliss and and be there, and it's all peaceful and lovely and beautiful, and all these beautiful beings and everything. But not if you get stuck there. And so I always think it's this balance between, heaven and earth, and human beings are sort of here in a way to find that balance within ourselves. And it's always a dynamic middle that we're searching for. Sometimes we're more up there and sometimes we're more down here, but it's all about finding that middle. And so if we're too open, and I've just heard horror stories from people who got right into astral traveling or whatever.
Mm.
And not that I'm not saying necessarily that it's a bad thing, but someone told me, they'd gone astral traveling, they'd met their loved one who died. Their loved one who died actually rejected them in the astral world and said, um, I kind of don't want anything to do with you, and turned away and all this stuff. And I think that's not them. They
That's an
they wouldn't do that.
impersonation. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's all that kind of dark thing can go on. Another person said that they had gone astral traveling and they were coming back to their body, or trying to come back to their body, and they couldn't get back in their body. Like they were really
Um,
struggling to get back in. And I was like,
like they had become
whoa.
disembodied, it had become too far.
Yeah, or they just
Yeah.
couldn't get back. I don't know what happened, but yeah, that kind of thing. I just think we need to be really, really careful, because often we don't really know what we're dealing with.
That's
So yeah.
very good point. I think a lot of these things have an element of mystery to them. I always tell my students, everything is theory until we get there and we know. It's all theory. And everybody has a lot of different directions and perspectives they take with all these things. But the best bet is to, always proceed with a little bit of caution. But I think your emphasis on the grounding is really important because we have to remember why we're here and what we're meant to do. And everybody has a purpose for that, right? We all have a purpose or multiple purposes for things that we're meant to accomplish and why we have this life, this physical life on earth, and the people that we're here with and the relationships that are very important that we're here for. And I think especially in a moment of grief, when you're meaning to connect with people, it can be very tempting to get lost in the daydream, to get lost in the spiritual, what we find connecting to them, right? And kind of, we've all met those people who are distracted, out of focus with their life, like not present. Or and I think a lot of stages of grief, we really hit those where we have a lot of inner world things going on and we're not focused and present in the outer world. And so, especially when doing this kind of work, I've found um, that grounding is very essential. I mean, I deal with clients all day, right? I'm doing a lot of spiritual work. I'm having sessions with people, and I find a lot of that upward shift of energy that is constantly moving through me and pulling me kind of up. But it's really easy to not be in my body and get distracted and get less focused. And then my children suffer, and my relationship with my husband suffers, and maybe the things that I'm meant to do, the people I'm meant to interact with here suffer, right? So we have a really essential purpose that we're meant to fulfill. We're not in spirit yet. We're still here. And we need to remember that. it's important. It's important for our own soul journey, and it's important for the people that are around us, our families, our children, our loved ones, you know. So I love that you bring that up. People people tend to forget. It's important to have a boundary and turn it off. And I will comment on that as well. The other thing I think is people think it's very novel. It's very interesting to have a spiritual practice and to have these kinds of gifts and make these kinds of connections and experiences. And a lot of people, when they're first kind of developing or understanding or coming into these things, they're like, well, I want it on all the time. So I
Hmm.
want to experience these things all the time because it's so cool. Like, or like this designates how much gift I have, how strong I am, that I can just pop into spirit whenever I'd like to. And that can become dangerous for the same reasons. It blurs those boundaries, takes our energy away from our life and the things that we need to be accomplishing here and the people we need to have interactions with. So I think that's also a very good point that like these connections are beautiful and great and so mutually beneficial for those of us here and those of us on the other side. But we have to remember that we are still here and we're meant to still be here, not on the other
Right.
side yet.
Yeah, I remember after my
Yeah.
son passed, I dove into near death experiences. I could stay up until like 3 a.m. reading them because it just brought me so much peace to understand. Like, I just wanted to know, where is he? Like, I already knew, I mean, he's on the other side, but what is life like there? What are his experiences possibly like? So I did a deep dive for probably the first year and a half after he passed away, and I read hundreds of near death experiences, and it was a great experience, but I'm glad I'm not in that phase anymore where I'm like spending all these hours, because I have to live my life. I've got to be present for my kids. I have to have energy. I can't stay up that late every night. Um, it was a phase. And I don't judge people for going into that phase. I just am glad I don't live in that phase anymore. And I've had people ask me, and I know people ask Elvis all the time, like, when you're out in public, do you just like see people's loved ones? Like, are you bombarded? And it's like, well, no, I actually don't even think about opening myself up to connect with anybody until I'm in a session. I don't think about it. I don't go there because, um, and it has happened a couple times, but the boundaries, right? Of I'm going to be living my life and being in the moment. I'm not just here to be, hey, you could give this message to so and so. It's like, no, that's not what I'm here for. Um, Certainly, if God wants me to do something, I'll pay attention. And I think also, like, the whole not being overwhelmed by spirituality, I think that's why we're supposed to pray always, because that kind of creates a proper connection, and God can keep us in a safety zone, right? If we're praying, it's like, help us to stay connected to God. And if we're connected to God, then we're going to be protected as we, connect to loved ones on the other side, or open ourselves up a little bit more. So we can pray always, and still stay rooted. I think that's one of the tricks too, is opening ourselves up to God, and He can help us figure out that middle ground.
That's a great point. I think prayer, as opposed to like some kind of deep meditation where you're trying to, in a sense, come out of your body, or those kind of practices, that's where prayer is, I think, the safest bet. I think there's a couple of other things I'd add, because I think coming into the body is important and being present in the moment, but I also think being able to think logically, like you normally do in normal everyday life, logical thought, just 1 + 1 = 2, still being able to just think logically and respond like a healthy
Rationally.
human, rational human being. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Um, there's that, and then also doing things that do balance out the emotions to some degree. So whether it's connecting with nature, whether it's just going for a walk, whether it's just getting sunlight, fresh air, those kind of things, enough sleep, all that stuff that just keep you emotionally, to some degree, when you're going through grief, that's not simple, but to some degree, a little bit more even. So it's these 3 things really, or 4 things: that being present in the body, being here in the here and now, thinking clearly and rationally, logically, balancing the emotions or the feeling life, and also having control over our own will. because that's the other thing that these other spiritual forces can take control of, or overshadow us with, is our will. What do I actually want to do today? I'm about to go and do this thing, but then it's like Facebook, right? You go on Facebook and you went to do this thing, and
Mm-hmm.
then an hour later you realize you've been scrolling and you're in this whole other world. It's a little bit like that. So bringing harmony to those four things so that we're still able to really function here on the earth. Because, like you said, Al, we are here in the body for a reason. The body, the earth, is very, very important. It's got this crucial role in the cosmos, and we're here, and we need to be here. I met somebody once who they were into past life regression,
Mm.
and this one person was saying, "Oh, I'm not really that interested in this life anymore. I'm much more interested in this past life I had." You know what I mean? It's so dangerous. It's just
Yeah.
dangerous. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I want to know what you guys think about this. So I've been reading the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and there's this really interesting quote I came upon a couple days ago. He's talking about how true transformation spiritually has to happen with the body, not away from it. The quote I'm going to read is, the fact is that no one has ever become enlightened through denying or fighting the body or through an out of body experience. Although such an experience can be fascinating and can give you a glimpse of the state of liberation from the material form, in the end, you will always have to return to the body, where the essential work of transformation takes place. Transformation is through the body, not away from it. This is why no true master has ever advocated fighting or leaving the body, although their mind based followers often have. So that's kind of interesting.
I would say we like if we're going to take a Christian lens to view that
Hmm.
particular quote, right? The body is a gift that we've been given.
Yeah.
And it's a gift to help us to experience this world and to learn, right? This is a school. Life is a school. We're meant to further our progression, further the enlightenment and the learning of our spirit. And through certain things, interactions with people, maybe tasks, certain things that we have to do here. And it seems to be that there's a very strong correlation between maybe physical learning and spiritual learning. When we truly embody all of these things, when we feel it in our body, um, I think it quickens the spirit. Like we get through stuff faster, maybe here.
Hmm.
Um, and so, and I mean, there's also the whole argument to be made for like resurrection and everything that comes to that in a very Christian context, right? That we are meant to be holistic in some way. We're not meant to be separated at the end of all things, right? We're meant to be both body and spirit. And so when one of those things is operating independent from the other thing, you don't have a wholeness. It's kind of more like a waiting period until the fulfillment can happen, right? So I would agree with that. I don't think that there will be true enlightenment in one half or another. You have to have both
Hmm.
balance.
What it made me think of was that what I think a really healthy spirituality is about bringing the spirit into the earth, or bringing the spirit into matter, or into the
Hmm.
body, so that we're actually, not, like I said before, not disappearing into the spiritual world and then feeling like it's got nothing to do with the earth whatsoever. But also, we're not just completely crashing down on the earth and thinking that matter is all that exists and there's no life after death and there's no such thing as the spirit or the soul, but actually bringing that, again, that balance in. So it's like we study, we read the Bible, or we do things that we to nourish ourselves spiritually, so that we've got more strength for life here on earth, so that we're more patient with our children and better at our work and all those things, so that our spirituality is like informing our everyday life. I think
Mm.
that's where I'm coming from. So I think the body is a huge part of that, right? We need the body to do all the things that we do, but we're not cut off from the spirit. But we're not just the body either.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. Yeah.
Love that. There's another quote later. He talks about the more consciousness that you direct into your inner body. Kind of like think of a meditative practice where you're, checking in with how your body's doing or, scanning your chakras or something. He's saying the more consciousness you do direct into your body, the higher its vibrational frequency becomes, like a light beam that grows brighter. And he says at this higher energy level, negativity doesn't affect you so much. You tend to attract new circumstances that reflect this higher frequency. And I think that's kind of what you were just saying, Mick, is it helps you if you can have this spiritual guidance from the other side. Um, if you can be tapped into the spirit, capital S, you are more patient with your kids. You might be more enlightened when you're at work. Like you get an idea that comes to you because you're receptive to what the other side is wanting to share to enhance your life, right? It enhances your life.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And also what Elle said there about the resurrection, it's from what we understand, or what I understand, it's a physical body. It's a physical body that's completely renewed and has become, the prototype in a way for the rest of us that we will one day experience. Um, but it's physical. It's a physical body, you know. So I think that's really important to mention. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I ask you in closing, Mick, what have you learned doing this work? What has impacted you probably the most? Maybe the top five things that have grown you.
Wow. I think just learning to be with somebody else's pain, just to be with someone when they're in pain and not to have to, our desire or my inclination is to want to do something. And,
Hmm.
as a coachy type person, as a mentor type person, you kind of want to do something, right? But initially, I think it's just so important just to be there and to really listen, as closely as possible, and to really get that understanding of where the person is, and then sort of go a step further and actually relay that back to them, so that not only have they been listened to and understood, they know they've been understood. So I've trained myself to listen very carefully so that I can almost, not word for word, but the main emotional themes that are there, that I can reflect them back. And that can be just very healing in itself.
Hmm.
Um, you said five things. I don't know how many that was. um, yeah, I think to meet people where they are. So not to, I don't even really mention Christianity as such, although, I carry that very strongly in myself. Um, and, I've actually, because I've actually had people come through the program who are Jewish, people who are not religious at all, who just call themselves spiritual. Had one person who um, had been brought up Muslim. So just to meet people where they're at and in a way learn to speak their language. Um, so, some people don't like the word God. They can't say it. Jesus makes the name makes them run a mile. And so I'm here to help the people no matter where they're at. And I still think deep down Christ is with us all anyway, on some level. So I've learned that as well. It's a big thing that I've learned.
That's
How do
beautiful.
you feel like it has influenced your own faith?
I feel like my faith just grows stronger every day. Um, but life's hard. Life's not easy for most people, I think. And the story or the images that Christianity gives us, which are also true, of the God suffering, that is the most strengthening thing I've come across in life. I think that. So I heard this story once where they were walking. These people were walking through a war zone. I think it was during World War II, and they'd come across dead bodies. They'd come across uh, several dead bodies that were there, and a couple of them were children. And one person, as these two people walking along, one turned to the other and said, "Where's God in all this? Where is God in all this?" And the other one pointed to the child and said, "There he is. He's there." So, meaning that, God is actually deep, deep inside the suffering of each of us, and inside the people that have been tortured and killed and murdered and all these horrible things that have gone on. He's not separated himself off and said, he's just the architect that set everything up and then disappeared. He entered into a physical body and went through the torture and the pain and the suffering that human beings go through, but maybe he went through it even more intensely because no God had ever been a human before. And so I think that story, that image, that reality can give everybody a lot of strength and courage for life.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is quite powerful.
Hmm.
Um, I love on the tail end of talking about embodiment, just bringing in the embodiment of Christ and what he went through in that whole travail. Is very powerful as one of the themes and concepts that Christianity often tackles, being like, why suffering? Why is that? Why is that a thing, part of the human existence? And where is God in that injustice? And I love that answer that he's everywhere and he is the God who weeps. He's the God who's been through it and has the mercy and the understanding because of that experience. Um, it's
I think
powerful.
even more than that, he did that or took that on in order to allow us to reconnect spiritually. It's almost looking at history. It looks like we were losing that. Around that time, or just a little bit earlier than that, the ancient Greeks were saying this saying that they had better to be a beggar in the real world than be completely lost in the realm of the shades. So it's almost like they'd lost all connection with the spiritual world. And I have this sense that Christ came and entered the physical body in order to give us that impetus to have that connection again. And
Hmm.
just one last point. I think I sort of said this already, but the early Gnostic Christians, from what we understand from history anyway, had this conception that Christ was God, but not really human, and this sense that he actually didn't suffer on the cross because he was sort of above it or too spiritually
Hmm.
whatever. And I think the idea that it's the opposite to that, that actually God became human for the first time, and that not just the torture and the cross and everything, the suffering of that, but actually the suffering of never having been in a body.
Yeah.
That it's almost like a whole nother level of suffering that we can't even kind of imagine. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a bit of a student of world religions, and I think I cannot think of one currently off the top of my head where they have any other themes very similar to that, where a god would come down, would condescend to the point of humanity, right? Who would want to do that? Seems
Well, it's
crazy.
it's the one thing that does separate Christianity from everything else. This embodiment, you know.
Right.
Um, in Islam, there is no embodiment. It's this separation. So
Right.
yeah, it's completely unique, and we are in a body. So
Hmm. It's deeply personal too. It's easier to relate to a God when he has suffered as we've suffered. He can give us that
Yeah.
lifeline.
absolutely,
Yeah, that
yeah.
validation. So,
Wow. It's a powerful, powerful impact on grief and suffering, as we know it as a mortal concept.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Mick. This was really a cool conversation, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will find it to be really intriguing as well. How can people find you? What's a good website for people to go to find you?
Yeah, sure. So it's spiritualscientist.org is where you can connect with me in terms of the grief work. The other place to go is just on YouTube to find the Spiritual Scientist podcast, which is I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. coming up with, and not just focusing on life after death or grief, but actually broader spiritual topics, even sort of where spirituality meets politics and history and all
Nice.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I've got lots of really, really great interviews. We've got someone, this guy, he used to play bass with Blondie, right? He wrote Blondie's hits, like Heart of
Wow.
Glass, I don't know. And he's written some books on spirituality too. So got him
Wow.
coming up. But yeah, that's
I
where to
love that.
find me.
That's cool.
Yeah, but thank you both very much as well. I've learned a lot from hearing you both speak. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, if people want to find out more about our podcast, you can go to our website. It's throughtheveilepodcast.com. We appreciate you sharing the podcast with your friends as we continue to grow. We're just about 35,000 listeners and viewers since we began, which is really exciting. So thank you so much for being with us today, Nick. We really appreciate this conversation and you taking the time.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you both very, very
See you
much.
guys next time.
Next time.
Bye.